Leave my house, you bitch! Ah!
Please, I didn't mean to!
I said, get out! I'm sorry, I needed it. Just give me a chance.
Get out now!
He fired me in front of his entire family at his own daughter's 16th birthday party, then told everyone I had been stealing from them for years, and not one person in that house defended me, not even the girl whose birthday cake I had stayed up until 2 in the morning decorating myself. That was 9 years ago, in a mansion in Beverly Hills with marble floors so cold they numbed your feet even through socks, and I still feel that cold sometimes when I close my eyes. My name is Clara, and I was the housekeeper for the Whitfield family for 11 years. I cooked their meals. I raised their daughters. I sat by their sick mother's bed when nobody else would. And on the night of Sophie's 16th birthday, billionaire Richard Whitfield looked at me like I was a stranger he'd never met, and threw me out into the dark with nothing but a garbage bag full of my own clothes. But this story isn't about that night. This story is about what happened years later, when that same billionaire, broke and humiliated and out of options, showed up at my door on his knees, begging me to save the only thing he had left. Before we go further, tell me where you're watching this from right now. Drop your city or country below. I read every comment. And if you believe a good heart always finds its way back to the light, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this with someone who needs to believe that the people who hurt you don't get the final word. Trust me, you have never seen a comeback like this one. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a small town outside Houston, Texas, raised by a grandmother who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. We never had much, but we had pride, and we had each other, and that was enough until she passed when I was 21 and left me completely alone in the world. I needed work fast, and an agency placed me with a wealthy family in Los Angeles who needed live-in help. That family was the Whitfields. Richard Whitfield owned a chain of luxury hotels stretching across 3 continents, and his wife at the time, a quiet woman named Diane, hired me the same week their first daughter was born. I was 22 years old, terrified, and completely unprepared for how much that family would come to mean to me. I started as a nanny, but over the years I became something closer to the glue holding that entire household together. I cooked every meal. I learned each child's favorite bedtime story by heart. I sat awake through fevers and nightmares, through Diane's long illness, through Richard's endless business trips that left his daughters wondering if their father even remembered their names. There were 2 girls, Lily and Sophie, 6 and 4 years old when I arrived, and I loved them the way I imagine a mother loves a child she didn't give birth to but chose with everything in her heart anyway. I braided their hair before school. I taught them how to ride bikes in that enormous backyard. I was there for every skinned knee, every heartbreak, every late-night confession only a child trusts to the person who tucks them in. Diane passed away when Lily was 12 and Sophie was 10, a slow illness that stole her gently over 2 painful years. I held that family together during a grief so heavy it nearly crushed the walls of that mansion. Richard barely came home during those months, burying himself in work because he couldn't bear sitting still with his own sorrow. I was the one who told those girls their mother wasn't coming back. I was the one who held them while they cried themselves to sleep for months afterward. I tell you all of this so you understand exactly how deep my roots had grown into that family by the time everything fell apart. 11 years. 11 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and love poured into people who, in the end, decided I was disposable the moment it became convenient for someone else's lie. It happened the way betrayal always happens, quietly at first, then all at once. Richard remarried when Lily was 16 and Sophie was 14, a woman named Priya who came from old money and carried herself like the house already belonged to her before the wedding rings were even exchanged. From the very first week, something about the way she looked at me felt wrong, cold, calculating, like she was measuring exactly how much space I took up in a home she intended to rule completely. Priya never raised her voice at me. She was far too clever for that. Instead, she planted small seeds, quiet comments to Richard about money missing from drawers, jewelry she swore had been moved, expensive items she claimed had simply vanished. I noticed these comments building over months, but I never imagined where they were leading, because I had done absolutely nothing wrong, and innocent people rarely expect to be punished for crimes that never happened. The girls, by then teenagers wrapped up in their own worlds, didn't notice the storm quietly forming beneath their own roof. I didn't blame them then, and I don't blame them now. Children trust the adults who raise them to handle the adult problems alone, and I had always carried every burden in that house quietly, exactly the way I was trained to. Then came Sophie's 16th birthday, the night everything I built shattered into pieces too small to ever fully gather again. I had been planning that party for weeks, the way I planned every single one of those girls' birthdays since they were old enough to blow out a candle. I baked Sophie's favorite cake, vanilla with strawberry filling, staying up until 2 in the morning getting the icing exactly right because she had mentioned once, years earlier, that she loved how the flowers looked on a cake from a bakery downtown, and I wanted to recreate that exact memory for her. The entire family had gathered in the grand living room, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pool Richard had lit up with string lights for the occasion. Extended family had flown in. Sophie's friends filled the room with laughter and music. I was in the kitchen finishing the final touches on the cake when Richard walked in, Priya standing slightly behind him, her expression unreadable in a way that should have warned me immediately. He told me to come into the living room. I assumed he wanted me to help bring out the cake, something I had done every single birthday for over a decade. Instead, standing in front of everyone, in front of Lily and Sophie, in front of cousins and aunts and teenage friends holding cups of punch, Richard Whitfield accused me of stealing thousands of dollars in cash and jewelry over the years. I felt the entire room tilt beneath my feet. I looked at Priya, and for one brief second, I saw something flicker across her face, satisfaction, quiet and cruel, gone as quickly as it appeared. I told Richard it wasn't true. I told him I had never taken anything that didn't belong to me in 11 years of working in that house. I looked desperately toward Lily and Sophie, searching their faces for even a flicker of doubt, anything that suggested they remembered exactly who had raised them when their own parents couldn't. Lily looked away first. Sophie, The birthday girl, still wearing the little gold crown her friends had placed on her head an hour earlier, simply stared at the floor. Richard told me to pack my things immediately. He said if I left quietly without causing a scene, he wouldn't involve the police, but if I argued even one more word, he would make sure I never worked in this city again. I begged him. I am not ashamed to admit that. I begged him to remember 11 years, to remember every sleepless night I spent by his daughter's beds, every meal I cooked with love instead of obligation, every secret I kept that protected this family's reputation more times than he would ever know. I looked at the cake still sitting untouched on the counter behind him, the one I had stayed up half the night perfecting, and something inside me cracked even further. He said something then that I will carry with me until the day I die. He said, "Clara, people like you always think loyalty buys you a permanent place in someone else's life. It doesn't. You worked for us. That's all this ever was, and that's all it will ever be." I packed everything I owned into one garbage bag because I didn't even have proper luggage of my own, 11 years of life reduced to something I could carry on foot, walking out into the cool California night with nowhere to go and no one waiting for me anywhere in this world. I stood outside the mansion gates for a long moment, watching warm golden light pour from every window, hearing faint music and laughter drifting from the party that continued without me, the same party for the same girl whose birthday cake was still sitting uncut on the kitchen counter. That was the moment something inside me went completely numb. I spent that first night in a 24-hour diner, nursing a single cup of coffee because it was all I could afford, too humiliated to call anyone, too broken to even cry properly. I had no savings worth mentioning because every spare dollar over the years had gone towards sending money back to distant relatives still struggling in Texas, the same way my grandmother once sacrificed everything for me. The accusation followed me everywhere. Wealthy families in Los Angeles all seem to know each other somehow, and word travels through those circles faster than truth ever can. Agency after agency turned me away once they heard the word stolen attached to my name, even though nothing was ever proven, even though no police report was ever filed, because Richard Whitfield's reputation alone was enough to end my career completely without a single shred of actual evidence. I remember spending 3 weeks living in a women's shelter downtown, surrounded by strangers carrying their own private storms, eating whatever simple meals volunteers prepared, feeling smaller and more invisible than I ever imagined a human being could feel. I called my only remaining relative, a distant cousin in Houston, one quiet night from a payphone outside that shelter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the receiver steady. She listened quietly to everything that happened, then said something I have held on to every single day since. She said, "Clara, the family that threw you away never deserved everything you gave them in the first place. Sometimes God removes us from places we've outgrown, even when it feels like losing everything all at once." I didn't believe her completely that night. Grief drowns out wisdom every time, especially grief mixed with public humiliation and complete financial ruin. But something about her words refused to leave me, quietly waiting in the back of my mind for the day I would finally be ready to believe them myself. For months after being thrown out, surviving on odd cleaning jobs that paid barely enough for a tiny rented room, I found a flyer pinned to a community center bulletin board advertising free business classes for women rebuilding their lives. I almost walked past it completely, certain someone like me had no business dreaming about anything beyond simple survival. But something stopped me that day, maybe my grandmother's voice, maybe simple desperation disguised as courage. I signed up. Those classes changed everything slowly, quietly, the way real transformation always happens. I learned things I never had access to growing up: basic accounting, simple business planning, the fundamentals of building something entirely your own instead of depending completely on someone else's mercy. I noticed something during those months that planted the real seed of everything that followed. Every wealthy family I had ever worked around relied entirely on domestic staff like me, yet almost none of those staff members ever received proper training, fair contracts, or any real protection when families like the Whitfields decided to discard them without warning or proof. I decided, sitting in that tiny rented room with barely enough money for groceries, that I would build something to protect people exactly like myself, the invisible workers holding wealthy households together while receiving absolutely nothing in return beyond a paycheck and, eventually, betrayal. I started small, almost laughably small. I created a basic agency, nothing more than myself and a borrowed laptop, connecting domestic workers with families willing to offer fair contracts, proper pay, and legal protection against exactly the kind of false accusations that destroyed my own career and reputation overnight. Word spread slowly among other women who had experienced similar injustices, women fired without warning, accused without evidence, discarded the moment their employers found someone younger or cheaper or more convenient. I understood every single one of their stories intimately, because I had lived through my own version already. There was a retention wall moment around month 9 that nearly ended everything before it truly began. I had finally secured a meeting with a property management company representing several wealthy apartment complexes across Los Angeles, the kind of contract that could finally stabilize my tiny, struggling agency. The night before that meeting, I received a call from the company's representative, his voice hesitant and apologetic. He told me someone claiming to represent the Whitfield family had reached out directly, warning him against partnering with my agency, repeating the same theft accusations from years earlier, insisting I would bring nothing but liability and risk into any household I touched. I sat completely still after hanging up that phone, feeling years of progress threatening to collapse beneath a lie that refused to stay buried no matter how far I traveled from that mansion gate. I almost gave up that night. I genuinely did. I opened my laptop and began drafting a message announcing I would be closing my agency completely, returning quietly to simple cleaning work, finally accepting that Richard Whitfield's prediction about my permanent place in this world had somehow, painfully, come true after all. But then I thought about every woman who had already trusted me, every domestic worker now employed under fair contracts because of an agency built from absolutely nothing but my own stubborn refusal to disappear quietly. I closed that draft. I called the property representative back myself. I told him calmly, without defensiveness, exactly what happened that night 9 months earlier, every painful detail, including the part where a billionaire told me people like me don't deserve permanent places anywhere. He stayed quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then he said something I will never forget. He said, "Anyone willing to tell that story instead of burying it has already proven more integrity than most people I've worked with my entire career." He gave me the contract anyway. That single contract changed everything. Not because of the money alone, though it certainly helped stabilize everything financially, but because it proved something I desperately needed to believe again. I was not what Richard Whitfield called me. I never had been. From there, growth happened slowly, then suddenly all at once. Within 2 years, my agency, which I eventually named Grace Home Staffing, after my grandmother whose actual name was Grace, became a recognized name among Los Angeles property managers and increasingly among wealthy families themselves, families who valued exactly the integrity and fair treatment I built my entire business around. Within 4 years, Grace Home Staffing expanded into San Francisco and eventually New York, 3 major cities where domestic workers desperately needed exactly the protection and dignity I had been denied myself. By year 6, we employed an internal team of 12 people and contracted with over 300 domestic workers across multiple states, each one receiving fair wages, legal protection, and contracts specifically designed to prevent exactly the kind of baseless accusation that once destroyed my entire reputation overnight. Have you ever been blamed for something you never did, by someone who used their power to make sure nobody ever believed your side of the story? If that's you, type the word truth in the comments right now, because you deserve to know exactly how many people watching this have survived that same painful lie. I bought my own small house in year 7, nothing extravagant, but completely mine, paid for entirely with money I built from nothing but determination and an unshakable refusal to let one cruel birthday night define the rest of my entire life. But despite every success, one wound never fully closed, the memory of 2 teenage girls I had raised with everything inside me, staring silently at the floor while their father destroyed my reputation in front of an entire room of witnesses, on what should have been one of the happiest nights of Sophie's young life. I followed the Whitfield family quietly over the years, not from obsession, simply from the natural curiosity anyone carries toward people who once defined such a massive chapter of their life. For a while, everything continued exactly as expected, Richard's hotel empire expanding, Priya appearing in society pages dripping with jewelry and borrowed confidence. But cracks started appearing around year 7. Whispers about declining hotel occupancy rates. A risky overseas expansion that drained resources faster than anticipated. The kind of slow collapse that happens when arrogance replaces careful strategy, when a powerful man surrounds himself with people too comfortable to ever challenge his decisions honestly. By year 8, headlines confirmed what whispers had been suggesting quietly for months. Whitfield Hotels filed for massive debt restructuring after several properties defaulted completely, investors fleeing in every direction as confidence collapsed almost overnight. I felt something deeply complicated watching all this unfold from a careful distance. Not joy exactly. Watching anyone's life crumble carries its own quiet sadness regardless of history, but something closer to painful validation, proof that the empire Richard always credited entirely to his own genius depended heavily on people he discarded without a second thought along the way. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, almost exactly 9 years since that birthday party, my assistant walked into my office wearing an expression I had genuinely never seen on her face before. She said, "Clara, there's a man here asking to see you. He says his name is Richard Whitfield, and he says it's urgent." For a moment, I genuinely believed I misheard her completely. I asked her to repeat the name slowly, needing absolute certainty before allowing myself to process what those words actually meant. She repeated it. Richard Whitfield. I sat frozen behind my desk, 9 years of buried memory crashing through my mind simultaneously, the cold marble floors, the garbage bag full of my entire life, the uncut birthday cake still sitting on the kitchen counter, 2 teenage girls staring silently at the floor while everything I built collapsed in front of an entire room of witnesses. And now, somehow, impossibly, that same man sat in my waiting room. I asked my assistant to give me several minutes alone. I needed them desperately, not to prepare clever words, but simply to breathe steadily against a moment I had imagined countless times yet never genuinely believed would actually happen. When I finally walked toward the lobby, I almost didn't recognize the man waiting there. The Richard Whitfield I remembered commanded every room he entered, expensive suits, effortless confidence, and energy demanding attention before he even spoke a single word. The man sitting nervously in my lobby looked nothing like that powerful memory. His suit, though clearly still expensive, hung slightly loose on a frame that had visibly lost weight. His hair, once perfectly groomed, showed gray he no longer bothered hiding. But his eyes shocked me most completely, eyes that once held nothing but cold, calculated certainty, now carrying something I genuinely never expected to witness in this particular man. Desperation, raw and unguarded. He stood immediately upon seeing me, and for several long seconds, neither of us spoke a single word. 9 years of unresolved history sat heavily between us, filling that quiet lobby with everything neither of us had ever properly said. Finally, he spoke first, his voice noticeably smaller than I remembered. He said, "Clara, thank you for agreeing to see me." I simply nodded, gesturing carefully toward my private office, choosing every word deliberately, refusing to let him witness exactly how deeply this entire moment affected me internally. We walked together into my office, a space I had built entirely from nothing, and I gestured toward the seat across from my desk, the same desk that once held nothing but desperate job applications and now represented everything I had rebuilt from complete and total ruin. He sat down slowly, glancing nervously around my office, noticing photographs lining my walls, photographs of domestic workers I had personally helped, women smiling proudly beside their first paychecks, their first apartments, their first genuine moments of financial independence. He cleared his throat, finally meeting my eyes directly, no longer carrying the arrogant confidence I remembered so painfully well. He said, "I imagine you've heard everything happening with Whitfield Hotels by now." I told him simply that I had read the headlines, nothing more, nothing less. He nodded slowly, then said something that genuinely caught me completely off guard. He said, "I came here because you're the only person I trust enough to actually help fix this properly. Everyone surrounding me either created this disaster or is too frightened of losing their position to tell me the complete truth about how severe everything actually is." I sat quietly, allowing his words to settle fully into the room, watching the man who once destroyed my entire reputation now sitting helplessly across from me, requesting exactly the help he once swore I would desperately need from him. I asked him plainly, "Why exactly me?" His answer came slower this time, heavier, each word visibly costing him something significant to admit honestly out loud. He said, "Because despite everything I did to you, you were always the most honest person inside that entire house." I was too arrogant back then to recognize how rare that actually was. I built my entire empire believing loyalty meant nothing without my personal approval attached to it. I was completely wrong, Clara. I've been wrong for years, and now I'm watching everything collapse because I surrounded myself with people who only ever told me precisely what I wanted to hear. I felt something tighten uncomfortably in my chest, watching pride finally crack wide open after years spent building elaborate walls specifically designed to protect itself from exactly this moment. I asked him directly, "What exactly do you need from me?" He explained slowly, painfully, that Whitfield Hotels faced complete financial collapse within months without serious intervention. Major investors were fleeing rapidly, spooked by years of mismanagement and declining trust throughout the industry. Without immediate, drastic restructuring, the empire he once swore would outlive him completely would disappear entirely, taking thousands of employees down with it. But then he said something that shifted the entire conversation completely. He admitted that beyond the business collapse, something far more personal had brought him specifically to my door that morning. He told me Priya had left him 2 years earlier, taking whatever remained of their joint finances the moment she sensed the empire crumbling beneath them both. He told me Lily, now 25, hadn't spoken to him in over a year following a brutal argument about exactly how he treated me that night, an argument she apparently brought up specifically because guilt had been eating at her quietly the entire time. And then he told me about Sophie. He said Sophie, now 23, had been diagnosed 8 months earlier with a serious illness requiring extensive treatment that the family's collapsing finances could no longer properly cover. He said she had been asking, repeatedly, desperately, for the one person who had ever truly nursed her through illness as a child. She had been asking for me. I felt my entire chest tighten painfully at the mention of her name. Sophie, the same little girl I had once carried piggyback through that enormous backyard, the same 16-year-old who stared silently at marble floors, gold birthday crown still sitting on her head, while her father destroyed my reputation completely, now lying somewhere sick and frightened, calling for the only person who ever truly nursed her wounds without conditions attached. I asked him quietly, "Does she know what happened that night? Does she understand exactly why I disappeared from her life so suddenly, on what was supposed to be her birthday?" He shook his head slowly, admitting that for years, both girls believed I had simply chosen to leave, that he had never told them the complete truth about the false accusations, far too ashamed to admit his own cruelty even to his own children. Something inside me shifted hearing that confession, understanding finally that Sophie had spent 9 years believing I abandoned her completely, never knowing the truth behind my sudden disappearance from a life I had poured everything into building alongside her. I stood slowly, walking toward my office window, looking out over a Los Angeles skyline completely different from the cold mansion grounds where everything once fell apart so suddenly. Without turning around immediately, I asked him quietly, "Do you understand what you actually took from me that night? Not just my job, not just my reputation, but every single memory those girls and I built together, completely erased the moment you decided convenience mattered more than truth, on the one night that was supposed to belong entirely to your own daughter." He admitted quietly behind me that he understood now, far too late to undo any actual damage, but completely, painfully understood nonetheless. I turned back around finally, facing him directly, watching genuine tears form in eyes that once held nothing but cold, calculated arrogance. I asked him plainly, why should I help the same man who destroyed everything I built without a single moment of hesitation? He had no immediate defense, just silence, shame, and the quiet sound of a once powerful man finally facing consequences he never properly anticipated experiencing. After a long, painful moment, he spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. He said, "You don't owe me anything, Clara. I know that completely. But I'm not really asking for myself anymore. I'm asking because Sophie deserves to know the truth before anything happens to her, and because she deserves the chance to have you back in her life, regardless of whatever decision you make about helping the company itself." That single sentence shifted everything inside me completely. This was no longer simply about Richard Whitfield's collapsing empire. This was about a sick young woman who had spent 9 years believing the person who loved her unconditionally had simply walked away without explanation, on the very night that was supposed to celebrate her. I sat back down slowly, studying him carefully, finally asking the question that would determine everything happening next. I asked him, "Will you tell both girls the complete truth yourself, in front of me, regardless of whatever I decide about the company?" He nodded immediately, without hesitation, agreeing completely. 3 days later, I walked back into that same mansion for the first time in 9 years, marble floors still cold beneath my feet, memories flooding back with every careful step toward that same grand living room where everything once fell apart completely. Lily and Sophie sat together on a couch, Sophie noticeably thinner, paler, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm California afternoon outside. The moment Sophie's eyes met mine, she began crying immediately, completely overwhelmed, whispering my name over and over like she still couldn't quite believe I was actually standing there in front of her again. Richard stood quietly beside the fireplace, then, exactly as promised, told both daughters the complete truth, every painful detail, the false accusations, the garbage bag, the cake that never got cut, the night I spent alone with absolutely nowhere else to go on what should have been the happiest birthday of Sophie's life. Lily cried hearing the full truth for the first time, finally understanding 9 years of unexplained guilt that had quietly haunted her relationship with her own father. Sophie reached for my hand the moment Richard finished speaking, holding it tightly, repeating quiet apologies for something that had never actually been her fault to begin with. I told her gently that none of this was ever her responsibility to carry, that no birthday, no celebration, should ever have been the backdrop for someone else's cruelty, and that children should never bear guilt for decisions adults make carelessly around them. That afternoon began a slow, careful healing process between myself and both girls, separate entirely from whatever business decisions I eventually made regarding Richard's collapsing company. I did eventually agree to help restructure Whitfield Hotels, not out of forgiveness toward Richard specifically, but because thousands of employees depended on decisions far bigger than 9 years of personal, painful history between just the two of us. I led negotiations personally over the following year, securing protections for every employee facing potential layoffs, restructuring debt responsibly, slowly rebuilding investor confidence through transparency Richard had never previously valued or understood. Throughout that entire year, I focused most of my personal energy on Sophie's recovery, sitting beside her through countless treatments, exactly the way I once sat beside her through childhood fevers, proving quietly through consistent action that real love doesn't disappear simply because circumstances tried forcing it away. Sophie's treatment succeeded completely. Watching her slowly regain strength over those months became the most meaningful reward of this entire complicated journey, far more valuable than any business success achieved alongside it. We even celebrated her next birthday together, quietly, just the two of us and a simple vanilla cake with strawberry filling, no crowd, no cruelty. Just everything that birthday was always supposed to feel like in the first place. One evening, almost exactly 1 year after Richard first walked into my office desperate and broken, he asked if we could speak privately after a long day finalizing the company's final restructuring details. We sat together in that same grand living room, quiet now, evening light fading softly outside familiar windows. He said, "Clara, I owe you an apology far more complete than anything I've offered so far." I stayed quiet, allowing him space to finally express everything he clearly needed to say honestly. He continued, "I was wrong about everything I said that night. You were never disposable. I was the one who never deserved someone as loyal as you standing inside my home all those years, and I was too arrogant and too frightened of losing control to ever properly recognize that truth until I lost absolutely everything that ever mattered." I felt something deep inside finally release completely, 9 years of carried weight slowly easing, not vanishing entirely, but settling into something far more peaceful than bitterness had ever allowed previously. I told him simply, "You didn't break me, Richard. You forced me to discover exactly who I was capable of becoming without depending on anyone else's permission or approval. That's something I never expected to thank you for, yet here we are." He nodded slowly, then asked quietly, "What happens now, considering everything has finally stabilized completely?" I told him honestly that my work managing Grace Home's staffing still required my full attention, and that whatever relationship I maintained moving forward would exist entirely separate from his company, built specifically around Lily and Sophie, not around him personally. He accepted that completely, understanding exactly the boundaries that honesty and genuine healing required moving forward. Today, Grace Home Staffing continues protecting hundreds of domestic workers across multiple states, ensuring no one else experiences exactly the painful betrayal I once survived completely alone. Sophie visits me regularly, healthy and thriving, often bringing Lily along, the three of us slowly rebuilding something authentic from pieces 9 years of silence once shattered completely. And somewhere in that same Beverly Hills mansion, Richard Whitfield continues quietly rebuilding, not an empire this time, but something far more valuable, genuine humility earned through complete and total loss. I think about that birthday night often, the night he told an entire room full of people that loyalty buys nothing permanent in someone else's life. He was wrong about almost everything that night, but accidentally right about one thing entirely. I never did survive by remaining the same woman discarded into that cold night 9 years ago. I survived by becoming someone completely different, someone stronger, someone finally capable of building an entire life from nothing but stubborn faith and quiet, unshakable determination. If this story touched something inside you, please take a moment right now to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone who needs to believe that the people who throw you away never get the final say in how your story actually ends. Comment below if you've ever been falsely blamed for something you never did, because your truth deserves to be heard exactly as much as mine did. Before we go, here are 10 lessons worth carrying with you long after this story ends. 1. The people who discard you the easiest are often the ones who needed you the most. 2. Real loyalty is proven quietly, through years of action, never through loud declarations. 3. False accusations hurt deeply, but they never determine your actual worth as a person. 4. The children we love unconditionally sometimes need time and truth before they can fully understand our absence. 5. True strength means rebuilding your life even when nobody believes your side of the story. 6. The lowest, coldest moments often plant the exact seeds your future resilience eventually grows from. 7. Forgiveness exists to free your own heart, never as permission for someone else's comfort. 8. Real success creates room to protect other people walking the exact same painful road you once survived. 9. Power without humility eventually collapses beneath its own arrogance, every single time. 10. The same hands once thrown away with nothing are often exactly the hands capable of rebuilding everything stronger than before. Thank you for staying until the very end. If this story moved you even slightly, make sure you're subscribed, because stories exactly like this one are waiting for you every single week. Stay strong, stay patient, and remember, the truth always finds its way home eventually.